So, one of the things you mentioned in like your our pre-roll questions is the idea of book scammers, and I'm wondering if when you say book scammers, this also leads into like the people that'll help you publish your book, which so many of them focus on helping, we'll say, people in an industry, quote unquote, establish authority. And I'm also maybe curious what what the percentage of the books that we put. Yeah, there's millions of books put out there. How many of them are put out people that really don't expect to sell the book? It's just there to kind of cement them in the SEO of the internet as an expert on a particular topic. They don't care if the book ever sells. It's just so that when someone looks up a topic, their name and the book come up, and they, okay, so and so knows something about this. Is that an appreciable part of the mix to make a difference, or not really?
Oh, it is. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there are plenty of people who publish books, both fiction and nonfiction, hoping for a mass audience. Very few of them get a mass audience, but people publish hoping for that. Then there are a whole lot of people in the 21st century who publish small batches of books that are things like family histories, company histories, histories of schools, personal memoirs that they're not really even interested in selling in bookstores or on the market. They want an item, they want a legacy, they want their relatives to know what their lives were like, they want their descendants to understand who they were. And so plenty of people publish books without really having ambitions to sell a whole lot of them. But most of the time, most authors are yearning for the mass audience, and the mass audience is extremely elusive. It's very hard to get traction and sell books. I mean, bestsellers do. Bestsellers now typically sell about 1 million copies. There was a bestseller last year called The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride, which is a wonderful book, and it has sold 1 million copies. Now, I'm glad for Mr. McBride that his book is so successful. I think it's great. But that's really very few books get up there. I mean, the New York Times bestseller list contains about 200 books a year. That's out of 2 million. So the chance of being a bestseller is around 1 in 10,000 titles. And a lot of authors just don't appreciate that. And it's something that they need to, or else all they can be is angry and bitter and frustrated.
I'm curious if you can break it down a little bit for the particular audience I'm usually going for, people that would call like genre fiction. And what does it look like for them? Because genre fiction, honestly, has never been the bestseller type of fiction, with the exception of like severe outliers, like say a Stephen King. Like it's always been a lot of people selling smaller amounts of books. Is the outlook the same for them? Is it different? I almost feel like it's like a worse situation because most of the people that even give a shit about books anymore tend to seem like they tend to fall into that kind of space. And like, as bad as it is for like mainstream publishing, it's almost worse for them because everybody wants to publish the next Game of Thrones or the next, whatever it's going to be.
Well, it's a two-edged sword. Genre fiction sells huge numbers of books. I mean, romance fiction is the perennial top category of fiction. Mystery and thrillers are not far behind. Westerns, action adventure, erotica, they all sell an enormous number of books in the hundreds of millions per year. But because they sell so many, a lot of people think, well, I'll write one and I'll sell a whole lot. And so those genre fields are incredibly crowded. And there's a whole lot more romance fiction being published every year than, for example, history or books about science. The genre categories are immensely, and they sell like blue blazes. But again, there's bestsellers and there's not. I mean, in the romance area, Colleen Hoover last year had 3 books simultaneously on the New York Times bestseller list, which almost never happens, but she's wildly popular. But what that means is that a whole lot of romance fiction writers don't sell very much at all. And why is that? who knows? I mean, there's a certain magic in the luck
I was
of
going to
who
ask
gets
why I've never heard of this person, and you went romance fiction. Like that's why I've never heard of her.
right. You don't focus
Skip
on
right
romance.
over it. Just go right past that section. Leave that to the wife. She can have it.
Right. Well, that's the way a lot of men feel. Very few men read romance fiction, but women eat it up. And which raises the point that most books are bought and read by women. Women read about three-quarters of all books and buy about two-thirds of all books. So if you're in the book business, your major customers are women.
So I actually do have a question about that because I have a lot of men out there that would actually argue that they feel like they were pushed out of, like, they don't buy books anymore because the industry no longer caters books for men. It's pushed so hard into writing for women that they don't feel like they can get anything they want out of certainly mainstream publishing. And so, there's a rise of, like, what do you call it? Uh, Pulp Rev, the Pulp Rev stuff that's coming out, where like they're going back all the way to like 50s and 60s fiction to try and find stuff that feels like it appeals to them, where the action adventure story was, premiere. Now that could just be wishful thinking on their part, but I know that a lot of the stuff I read, certainly in the horror genre today, doesn't feel like the stuff that was coming out in, say, the 80s or 90s. Like, I'm going to be honest, a lot of it feels like it was written by cat ladies for cat ladies and not for me.
Um, I'm not going to argue with you. There's plenty of trash written, but I will say this: that with 2 million books a year, if you look carefully, you can almost always find something that you're going to enjoy.
Oh no, absolutely. That's why I do this, because like I want people to make more of the stuff I like. It's completely self-centered. I want to convince people to make science fiction novels and horror novels that are directed directly at me.
And science fiction, horror, action adventure, a lot of those books that were published in the 20th century can come back into print digitally in the 21st, and so they haven't gone away. One of the great strengths of digital publishing is that books no longer go out of print. I mean, if you're interested in a horror novel that was published in 1956, it probably went out of print by 1960, and you just couldn't get it until many of those have come back into print because books are now digital files. And when anybody wants one, it can be printed one at a time.
And so this is making it even worse for authors, because it's not like they're even competing against their contemporaries. They're competing against, like, in a way they never could have, the previous, forebears in their industries, because, like you said, nothing ever goes out of print.
Yeah. If you think that 2 million books a year is distressing, consider this: Amazon offers 17 million trade titles in English, 17 million books of the kind that would be sold in bookstores. I'm not talking about textbooks or religious texts or, business titles. I'm talking about books you would find in bookstores. Amazon lists 17 million of them, plus 2 million more every year as the new ones come out. So on the one hand, that's awful for authors. I mean, it reduces every book to a snowflake in Antarctica, a blade of grass on a golf course that'll never get noticed. On the other hand, if you look carefully and you do notice, you can find books that you wouldn't have been able to find when books used to go out of print. So it depends on your point of view, and
It's a buyer's market's what I'm hearing.
yeah, the key thing is that authors and aspiring authors need to understand that the competitive universe in which they operate is so much more competitive than it's ever been. And you have to swallow hard and deal with that.